Hey guys, this is Jonathan McCormack. I'm an attachment specialist in New York. You can find me at Adult Attachment Help, attachmenthealinghelp.com. I'll get that right one day. And I want to talk today about one of the most fascinating things about attachment. And I was so surprised when I learned this, is that whether you're able to attach to another human being or not has a lot to do with something called mentalization. Not exactly introspection. This is about thinking about your thinking. You know, can you recognize how the way that you're thinking about things is affecting other people, is affecting how you're viewing reality? This is very strange. Why would that affect attachment patterns? And I looked at these studies, and people would go through these terrible things of trauma, and yet some of them would develop, post-traumatic stress, but some of them would not at all, and they wouldn't have any issues. But they went through the same things: losing their families, homelessness, sexual abuse, real trauma. Why? Well, why come some of them got through it fine and others didn't? And what they learned was the people who got through it okay were able to talk about it a lot as children. As children, they had people around them, mostly adults, that would help them make sense of what happened. So they were able to narrate things. They were able to take these little experiences and metabolize them into their sense of self. Dan Siegel, all those guys, when they talk about attachment, one of the big things is, do you know where you came from? Do you know how your past affected who you are? So you know where you want to go to. And that fascinates me, that just being able to talk about these things and narrate them made such a huge difference. And indeed, Gabor Mate, all those guys, they'll say trauma isn't what happens to you. It's how you react to what happened to you. And you can actually tell everything a lot about a person's attachment style by how they talk, their sentence structure. It's fascinating. So this thing called mentalization, all right? There are people, and you could talk to them, and they're very insightful. They'll talk about how they are with friends, with coworkers, with their boss, and everything they're telling you makes perfect sense. They sounds like they're embedded in reality, makes perfect sense. And then try to talk to them about their family, what happened as a kid, and all of a sudden their sentence structure begins crumbling. Thoughts don't quite link one to the other. They start rambling. So if you're an avoidant, I could ask about your boss, how are things with your boss? You can give me all these wonderful adjectives, all this great analysis. And then I'll say, by the way, growing up, how are things with your father? And you'll say something like, good, they were good. Oh, okay. Because, you did tell me that your father, chained you to the toilet for like 5 years, and that seems hard. Yeah, I got over it. Like no awareness, no introspection. That is too painful. And there's something called Gritchy's maxims. Like if you want to talk to people, there's a couple things you got to do to make your speech socially acceptable. One of the things you do is you give enough information. If you're avoidant, usually you will not. So if you talk to avoidant, you want to know what's going on, but they will not volunteer information about these things. They'll just use one or two words, and you'll have no idea what they're going through. Someone on the anxious spectrum will be the opposite. So you'll say, oh, tell me about your father, and all of a sudden they will launch into like a 20-minute diatribe. Some of it will be about their father. Some of it will be about something else. They'll probably go into several different subjects, and you'll be trying to follow them, the point, but it won't be clear to them. Why? They never metabolized it. They don't have a congruent, harmonious story of who they are because they never thought about it. They had no one growing up to speak about these things to. So you have to be able to make sense of your story. It's one of the big things. Listen, if you want to heal your attachment, you have to be able to collaborate. You have to heal those wounded parts, and you have to be able to mentalize. You have to have a narration. Another interesting thing, though, is some people, even though they're known to talk to, they were still pretty good. They were pretty good at this. And one theory is that they read a lot when they were a kid. Avoidants are more like this. So they read novels, fiction, fantasy, things that help them make sense of what they went through in childhood, even though they had no one to talk to. And so a big part of this whole attachment piece is, of course, emotional intelligence. And so I'm a big believer in poetry and art and really trying to understand emotionally what's happening, because avoidants have no idea what's happening emotionally. And people who are anxious, they know what's happening inside them emotionally, but they're not looking at that. They're looking at you, the other person, making sure the other person's okay, until they become alienated about themselves. And they won't talk about it. Oftentimes they'll say, like, well, how did that affect you? How did, boy, when you were a kid, I know you kind of took care of your father. How was that? I want to know how you felt about it. But instead they'll say, like, well, I felt so bad for my dad. My dad was sick. And oh, okay, your dad. How did you feel about it, though? That must have affected you. It did, especially since I really wanted my dad to feel okay. And I really wanted to make sure he didn't feel bad and he didn't feel awkward about me taking it. Okay, I get it. You're worried about your father's feelings. What about you? And so that's why I get into it. Um, so I do drawing, and I'm not a great artist, but I try to get this to see what people are feeling like. And I did some drawings about trauma and attachment. Um, that I thought were pretty good. Let me see if I could share my screen. Oh, there we go. Very nice. Okay, so there's my screen. So here's a drawing. I hope you guys can see it. I did. And I drew this about a man and a woman trying to touch one another. There's so many times that's what you want, a connection. You want to feel the other person, really. We have such problems doing this. So we have this guy right here. He's the man, here's the woman, and he takes out of himself these little creatures, these little ugly creatures to give her. And I did that because a couple people I talked to who experienced trauma, sexual abuse, they felt that they had something inside them that was ugly. And no one would ever really touch them. No one would really get to know them because at a certain point, they take out these things. Look at this ugly thing that lives inside of me. And this is all I have to give. And no one's going to want that. And then, so I have the woman here, and she's holding this serpentine thing, this creature with her face. And that's defensive. That's a defensive mode. Don't try to get near me. You try to get near me, and I have this ugly creature. And there are people trying to make themselves ugly because they feel ugly. There's something in attachment problems called perversity, a perversity defense, where you say and do the ugliest things possible to push people away so they don't get close. And so you have this scene, I've seen this a million times, with this woman trying to keep the other person away with something she believes is monstrous about herself. And then the guy, and I don't know what else is going on here, but on the bottom you have little creatures. These are kind of like your little wounded children, and these little wounded children are being ignored. But when I did do that, I was thinking of Rika's a poem, No One Lives His Life. So it goes, no one lives his life disguised since childhood, haphazardly assembled from voices and fears and little pleasures. We come of age as masks. Our true face never speaks. Somewhere there must be storehouses where all these lives are laid away, like suits of armor, or old carriages or clothes hanging limply on the walls. Maybe all paths lead there, to the repository of unlived things. And a lot of people attachment, even if they're relationships, they're not living. No one sees them. They have this love inside them that lives a separate life that no one knows about, and they're completely isolated. Another thing I did was this drawing. Where did yeah. So this person was telling me how they were feeling. This is them as a little kid, their mother and their father. And every time their mother would come to try to touch them, their hands, this is how they described it. It's almost like something would chop off their hands. Like this person, this girl felt she was doomed, that anytime anyone would try to come and touch her, to love her, something would happen to sabotage it. It was almost if she had like not a guardian angel, like a guardian demon that would just make sure she was forever alone, forever trapped. And even her parents weren't able to touch her. Something would happen, you know? And I was like, wow, imagine what that would be like if you lived that way. What would that feel like? And so I tried to kind of represent that, here. I have a bunch of things like that. And just one more, the last one. I have tons, but so this is anxiety. This person was explaining to me what it's like dating. And so here's one figure completely anxious, and here's this other figure, huge, lurking, monstrous. And they said, when I'm dating someone, I feel like I'm not even a person. I feel like I'm so anxious. I'm just kind of falling apart. And the other person is almost like this huge lurking thing that I shrink down, when a rabbit or an animal is being attacked, they fawn, they freeze, they go into the state of helplessness, and that's how it feels. It feels like they're a little kid and their partner is this kind of adult authority figure, but also they have a hard time connecting to them as person to person, because it's almost like this other person is like, I don't want to say a god, but this thing that's going to judge their worth. I mean, oh boy, it's going to judge whether you're lovable or not. That's pretty serious, I mean, that's above humanity. I mean, you're almost turning this into like some religious, oh boy, if this person loves me, I'm a human being, I'm a real human being. And that's often though exactly how it feels. So exactly how it feels. And that's why you put so much strain and stress on a relationship. What do I do here? Oh, so I'll stop sharing my screen right now. I try to get into that because Mira Rothenberg, she describes the void of loneliness in children, of neglect. These are people who are left alone a lot. Oftentimes they'll be avoidant. And she says that there's a book called Children with Emerald Eyes. And she says, sometimes there's sex to fill this void. And the sex is then strange. There's little giving, there's taking, and there's devouring of you. And whenever you can give to fill this void, the exquisite giving and taking is no longer. The balance is disappointed, because it is to take, to calm, to quiet this awful howl of loneliness and the hunger that derives from loneliness, to feed, so that for once, for this one short while, the need, the plea, the want is filled. That happens in avoidance, because for avoidance, their needs are not legitimate. It happens to a lot of people. I need to be understood. That's not the message they got as a kid. Their message was probably, it doesn't matter what you're feeling at all. So that needs no good. Need to be delighted in, to be supported. Again, no, parents are busy. You don't need any support. What needs are left? Need, I hate that word, but okay, physical gratification. That's the only one that's left. And that's the only way they can connect to another human being on that intimate level. And that turns into uh, almost some call it a cannibalistic relationship, that you're not flourishing, you really are devouring the other person because it comes from a place of need. It's not like I have so much love to give, it's overflowing. I have so much to give. I talk to guys that get into a relationship. I was like, what are you trying to share? I remember when I was very young, I talking to a therapist, and I goes, well, I was like 17 or something. I was like, well, I want to get into a relationship. I want to get married or whatever. And she goes, well, you have nothing to give. Like inside, you have nothing to give. What would you give a girl? You know, like, what do you have to give? And at that time, I had such little inside me. And she was absolutely right. You know, you have to have something to give, or else it's all going to be about taking. And in that case, intimacy will actually make you feel worse, you know? So there are a lot of women out there, and they got the message, what's important about you, your looks. That's the important thing, your beauty. Yeah. And their parents give these little messages all the time. So they can get into relationships. What do they want? Obviously, they want a guy to or girl to appreciate their beauty. But if that happens, they get resentful because, yeah, this is the only thing my parents said was worthwhile. And yeah, I feel like, is this the only important thing about me? And if they don't get that, then they'll feel insulted because deep down inside, they still kind of believe it. And they describe just their relationships with these guys and girls, and it was just absolutely brutal. I did do a drawing. It's a little, actually, I'm not going to show it because it's a little too crazy. But as they were telling me these things, I'd ask, can you make sense of that? Give me a story, put this in narrative. Can you relate that to how you grew up, to how you are now, to what you actually want? It has to be three things. A lot of times we know where we came from, we know where we are. What do we want? It'll be too vague. I want to be happy. No. It has to be very specific. What would that look like if you were happy? Would that look like you, I don't know, hopping out of bed first thing in the morning? Would that look like you exercising more, going to a lot of different places? It has to be specific. It's only by you have to have a line that connects the past to the present to the future to know where you are in life. If you don't know where you are, you're going to feel very unsafe. And it's very hard if you don't know who you are or where you're going to be in a relationship, period. Even if you have all those other things, because at a base level, you're going to feel that something's wrong. I don't know if anyone here is starved, really almost starved to death, but I have. And what happens is the first 3 days, you're very hungry. And then you're not. You get some norepinephrine and you're pretty good for a week or so. And then your body gives that signal that something is wrong. And it feels terrible. Perhaps someone here has almost died. I've been through a couple of those. And it felt like I was really going to die. And it felt like my organs were shutting down. And this was it. And again, I got this deep, visceral, somatic feeling. Something is not right. I tell you, when you're all alone, when you're feeling completely lonely, your body does the same thing. Very similar action as if you were starving to death. You are touch starved, love starved, whatever. And it's this feeling that something's not right. And people look at you and be like, what's the matter? You got a job, you wake up, everything, you got some money, maybe you don't, but what is so bad about your life? What is so bad? Something inside you is telling you that something is wrong. And it's constant. It's not a huge deal. It's just someone telling me, hey, something's the matter. Okay. After a couple hours, a couple weeks, a couple months, that becomes very painful, It becomes very, very painful because you're not paying attention to it. Why? Because you have no idea. What is it? There's something, you're looking around your life and I guess it's okay. It's not great, but why would I feel this bad? And that's the reason, because, if you were in primal society and it looked like you didn't have a whole lot of friends, that meant you were probably going to die. You need a lot of friends. You need to be in a tribe. When you walk out your door, you need to see all friendly faces that you know very well. We haven't had that since couple centuries. We walk out now, and they've done MRIs, and the MRIs are almost the same for primal peoples who just got their villages razed and destroyed, because they walk out and they don't see familiar faces, and your brain's like, oh my lord, what happened to my tribe? I'm all alone. I'm going to die, and it's that feeling that comes. So I know people talk about attachment issues. They kind of put all these other social issues on the side, but that's got to be part of it. Do you have a friend, a job, a partner, a hobby, a spirituality? That's important, all those things. And if you really want to get serious, look at the people who are successful relationships, really successful. They usually have a couple friends, more than one, I mean, ideally, you want five. If you're on the anxious and needy side, well, that way you have five different people, avoidance, you're lucky you even have one friend, but you want five. You want the stability. You want a place in society. And if you don't have that, you just feel terrible. The other piece, how terrible are you going to feel? It depends how much shame you have in your life. How much shame do you have? Did something happen to you when you grew up? I don't know. But that shame is so intolerable, it just eats you alive. And you need all these other little things of support to protect you from that darkness kind of coming in and devouring you. So you want to be able to tell your story. And that's oftentimes why I wonder if the 12-step things don't, why they work well, is you go there and you tell your story, and, they can call it narrative therapy if you wish, but it gets you thinking and thinking about your thinking, and then it gives you a meta perspective. So you're not stuck reacting, just like, oh, okay, you kind of see what's happening, For that, I read novels, poetry, I look at artwork, I do all those things. That emotional intelligence to me is a big part of the entire attachment piece that very often doesn't get discussed. If you look at the greatest psychologists and thinkers, they're always quoting novels and this and that, because they have this huge reservoir that they can look at outside of their own little experience. It's hard to understand where someone's coming from, period. I know people say, like, oh, I get you. You really don't. Empathy is very disrespectful oftentimes. Oh, I get it. No, you don't. You haven't been there. Maybe you have a little bit idea. Well, you can be as interested, though. Be very interested, like, wow, what was that like, And to do that, developing these emotional skills can go a long way. So hopefully I did those so you can see what it feels like to be that person. Maybe your boyfriend, your girlfriend. Think about how it feels to feel love as a threat. How would that feel? Imagine that, and you can do that with different novels and poetry and artwork. So thank you for listening to me ramble. Jonathan McCormack. Guys, take it easy.